Hello and welcome back to Ponder Policy. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2024 presidential matchup between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And based on the polling that we have in key battleground states, my analysis of those polls, and my predictions for the months leading into the November election, how I believe that this election will play out, and my predictions for these different race ratings. So for starters, with Harris at the top of the ticket, instead of Biden, I believe it reassures a lot of voters, especially in traditionally Democratic states, to come back to the Democratic column. And many of these states, starting with Minnesota, home state of Tim Walz, New Hampshire, Maine at large, Virginia, and Maine's 2nd District, I believe will all stay in the Democratic column by 2 to 5 percentage points. I don't think these states are going to replicate Biden's margins in 2020. Generally, you have a much more favorable environment for Republicans across the country. But even though some of these states were much more competitive when Biden was on the ballot, with Harris at the top of the ticket, I do believe that they go pretty solidly into the Democratic column, and that Donald Trump and his campaign will probably suspend a lot of their campaigning in many of these states just to focus on many of these more key battleground states. What we have left are the widely accepted battleground states of this election, states that can conceivably go Democrat or Republican in this cycle. But that's not to say that these races don't have a favorite based on polling and my analysis of it. So let's just jump right in. Nevada, currently, Donald Trump is up by 2.2 percentage points. And this was a state that both Biden and Hillary Clinton won by 2.4 percentage points in the previous two elections. They won by the same margin. Donald Trump leading in the polls for the first time in this state, a state that has traditionally gone Democratic, but recently has become much more competitive. Donald Trump leading by this much, I do think that his support will diminish in terms of the actual result of this election, just because there is a Republican polling bias across the state. We saw this in 2022 when Republicans were overestimated in all the polling numbers across the state. I do believe that Donald Trump at this moment is currently set to win the state, although I wouldn't take it out of possibility that Harris is able to win Nevada, just given that Republican bias in polling. Currently, I have it as a tilt state for Trump. I do believe it's still going to be to the left of Arizona. Many people are suspecting it might be to the right of Arizona in this election, and that's entirely possible. But right now, I do have Donald Trump winning the state of Nevada by just under 1 percentage point, probably in that range. Arizona, another key battleground state, a state that Trump would very much like to add to his column, and it makes it very easy for him to get a path to 270 electoral votes. Currently, in the RCP average, Donald Trump leads by just 0.2 percentage points. But I would like to also note that some polls have Harris leading by 5. This New York Times Siena poll, especially in the methodology, you have a Biden plus 7 sample from 2020. Biden won the state of Arizona by only 0.3 percentage points, so Harris underperforming those numbers by 2 percentage points means that she, even in this poll, which is the best poll for her right now, she would lose the state of Arizona. I do believe that while Kari Lake is probably going to lose the Senate contest within the state, Donald Trump is also going to win the state by over a percentage point. I think Kari Lake is probably going to underperform Donald Trump pretty significantly. But that all being said, Trump is probably going to win the state of Arizona, at least by my prediction, by over a percentage point, probably less than 2 percentage points, though. This is still a battleground state. It's still going to be a very close race. Polling does have Donald Trump underestimated in 2020 and 2016 based on his performance. So polling probably, if anything, overestimates Democrats. And Donald Trump, I suspect, is probably going to win by over a point within Arizona. Going over to Georgia, another key battleground state, probably a must-win state for Donald Trump. In our current RCP aggregate, Donald Trump is leading Harris by 1 point across, multiple polls. We have a lot of polling out of the state of Georgia. This state was generally considered to be very good polling in the 2020 election cycle, especially compared to states like Wisconsin, states like Nevada, where the polling was just off one way or another. 4 years ago, Donald Trump was actually leading in Georgia by just over a point, even greater than his current margin. And at that election, Donald Trump ended up losing the state very narrowly. However, I do suspect that this average is going to be very close to Donald Trump's final result. I do think that he's going to regain a lot of support, especially in terms of turnout from the rural parts of Georgia. This was a state that voted for him by over 5 points in 2016. And right now, I actually have Georgia as a lean state for Donald Trump, just over a percentage point. I do believe he flipped the state from 2020. And I do think that it's going to be just over a percentage point. This could narrow down to tilt, and Harris even has a chance within the state. It's going to be closer than it was when Biden was on the ballot, where this wasn't even really considered a winnable state for him. I do believe that it's winnable for Harris, but right now I have Donald Trump favored. North Carolina, probably the most Republican-leaning of any of the swing states in this cycle. Trump is currently favored by 1.2 percentage points. However, in the previous 2 election cycles, Democrats were very heavily biased in the polling data that we had. I would suspect that Donald Trump wins by at least 2 percentage points in this race. I don't think that the samples in the New York Times Siena poll have been the best. While it is within the margin of error, so it is much more believable, I do think that Trump is pretty heavily favored in North Carolina, and his campaign is spending some efforts to do rallies in the state, run ads along the state, because it is in a similar media market to Georgia anyway. So it's not a state that's out of reach for the Harris campaign, but I do think that more so than any other swing state in this election, Trump is probably favored to win by probably 2+ percentage points. It could be the case that he wins by as much as 4 percentage points, and in that case, then Mark Robinson for the governorship, he is likely to underperform Trump by at least a few percentage points. He may ride to victory if Donald Trump's margins in the state cross 3-4 percentage points. But that's all I have on North Carolina. I suspect just over 2 percentage points as of right now. Going into the Rust Belt, these are going to be the key states for this election. Wisconsin is a key battleground state because it is the best, easiest pickup for Harris to be able to reach 270 electoral votes. Right now, we have an RCP average of Harris +1, but I would caution this with more so than any other state in the country, Wisconsin polls favored Democrats more. You saw in 2016, Hillary Clinton favored by 9.4. Donald Trump ended up winning the state by about 0.66 percentage points. Biden, at this point in the race, was favored by 4.6 percentage points. He ended up winning the state by similar margins, about 0.66%. Harris underperforming Biden in polls at this point in the race by 3.5 percentage points means that Trump actually probably leads in these aggregates because these are using similar samples to 2020 margins. So for those reasons, I do believe that by tilt margins, Trump is actually favored to win Wisconsin as of right now. Yes, this is winnable for Harris and is probably her most likely path to the White House if she were to win. But at this point, I have Trump winning the state of Wisconsin by tilt margins. But we still have 2 very key states left. In the state of Michigan, this is the most left-leaning of any of the Rust Belt trio. Currently, Harris is favored by 2 points in the polls. This was a state that Biden won by 2.4 points. And yes, there have been some disagreements, especially in the Dearborn area with the Muslim community being upset over the war in Gaza. That does limit some of the Democratic support across the state. But as of right now, I do believe that Democrats have enough support to be able to hold on. While yes, the state in polls does heavily overestimate Democrat performance, and Harris is only at 2 percentage points, I do believe that there's enough residual support within the state to carry Harris across the finish line in Michigan. And this is a must-win state for the Harris campaign. Pennsylvania is likely to be one of the closest states in this election cycle, and recently Trump has actually regained the lead in our current polling. This state, again, like most of the Rust Belt, overestimates Democrats in polling, and I suspect that Trump is actually favored by more than 0.2 percentage points as of right now. This was a state that Biden won by 1.2 points. He, at this point in the race, was polling at 5.7. Clinton was polling at 9.2, and Donald Trump won the state by about 0.4 percentage points in 2016. So I would suspect that Donald Trump is also favored by tilt margins to win the state of Pennsylvania. This would also mean that in the first time in 3 elections, the Rust Belt trio is split. I do believe that Donald Trump is able to win the state of Michigan. I do believe that Kamala Harris is able to win the Rust Belt trio and secure the White House. But as of right now, I think Donald Trump is heavily favored to be the 47th president of the United States. That's what the data suggests. That's what the polling suggests. A lot can change between now and November, but as of right now, that's my prediction. And thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a comment on the video, leave a like, and have a great day.